Hi, everyone. My name is Eli. I'm currently the Vice President of Night Hacks. If you're here for a React workshop, which I assume all of you guys are, you're in the right place, which is awesome. We usually start by just going over a couple of announcements, and there's some really important announcements for the next 2 weeks, so I want to make sure that we cover all of them in detail. And the first one is that we have a lot of things that you can apply for at the end of the semester here for next year. So we of course run a hackathon every single year. We're aiming for late fall this year if we can, but it might have to get pushed to spring, depending on how it all works out. But we need a sponsorship team to help us attract company sponsors to help fund the hackathon and all the prizes that we give away, and then all the merchandise that we give to people that participate. So our sponsorship team is probably the most important team for actually making sure it happens. We have a sponsorship team lead, and she's going to be running interviews over the next several weeks. So if this is something that would be interesting to you to get involved with Night Hacks, that'd be a great place to do it. There is no immediate deadline on this form. So, it doesn't have to be literally tomorrow. You can think about it, but the spots are of course limited. So apply sooner rather than later. The other really important thing that you can apply for right now is an officer position. Our entire executive board, president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer are all getting replaced at the end of the semester. Sorry, let me just put my phone on Do Not Disturb. So these candidacy declaration forms, which is also on the link tree, it's due on April 17th at midnight, and then the election will be the 2 days after that. So you'll have to submit which position you want to run for, a couple of screenshots just to prove that you don't have any academic holds or anything like that. And then also a bio for why you want to run, and maybe a video if you're interested in submitting that. So that will ideally be done by Wednesday. So it's very, very soon if this is something you're interested in. So far, we've only had one person declare for candidacy, so it's still wide open. And it would be a great way to get involved in Night Hacks for the whole year in whatever position you're interested in. But we have a lot of events running next week that you can come to. I think this is literally going to be our single most busy week of the semester. So Monday and Tuesday, we're going to be voting for new officers. If you're a member of this club, you are allowed to vote in the election. You'll get a link to vote. You also have to be a member to run for officership. So, get involved with that if you can. Tuesday, we're going to have our only social event of the semester. It's going to be at Topgolf at 6 p.m. We'll give more information over the weekend once we have a finished flyer and the specific details drafted. And then also on Tuesday at 11:59 p.m., if you're part of a projects team, your submissions will be due at that point, so we can judge them on Wednesday evening. Thursday, we're going to have our final workshop of the semester. So this is next Thursday. It's going to be a collaboration with two other clubs, Active Minds, which is sort of a mental health awareness club, and IEEE, which is a lot of electrical engineering. It's going to be a really cool way to explore a new technology of conductive paint. So a lot of hardware and making some cool things with paint that can conduct electricity, and then also learning a little bit about some of the work that Active Minds is doing. And then Friday is going to be our last GBM of the semester. Normally our GBMs are during this time and we fill them with workshops, but we're going to have our GBM on Friday instead. And it's going to be the project showcase. So come look at all the projects people have done. If you're on a project teams, we'll be giving out awards to people. Hey, how's it going? So we're going to be giving out prizes to all of our projects teams. Well, not all of them, but several of them. There'll be pizza for everyone. And if you are a member, we will be distributing shirts on Friday. So you should definitely come for that. It'll be a good time, if nothing else. Okay, that is all the announcements for next week. All of this is going to be communicated many, many times over the next weekend and week plus. So don't be overwhelmed. And that's pretty much it. Okay, so now that we're through the announcements, I think it would be a good idea to just jump right into what we're going to do today. So normally when I come to a workshop, I try to have a specific project lined up that we can build and learn from over the course of the workshop. And that is the case here, but I am not nearly as intimately familiar with this project, which I made a couple of months ago for our hackathon, as I would be during a normal week. So this is going to be a little bit of self-discovery. So we're going to work through this together. We can, add whatever you guys want to add, and we'll try and go over the basics of Node, React, writing in JavaScript, anything that you need to get started with making actual front ends. And I just want to show you the general look of what we're going to make. We're going to make a two-part system. One part, it looks terrible. Please excuse how badly this looks. I did not put any stylings on here. This is bare bones. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do sort of an age predictor using a API call so that you can see how you can interact with backend services. We're using an API called Ageify, which is really easy to sign up for. You don't even have to sign up or have an API key or anything. So it thinks that I'm 31 years old. Spoiler, I'm not 31 years old. And we can also make a to-dos list. So we can have a bunch of items, like maybe we could have this be our React workshop. And then our description could be learn about front-end development. And we'll have this due by today, which is 4-14-22. If we submit, we have our little item down here for our to-do list. So this is very, very bare bones, but we're going to at least learn how React works so that in the future you can go and make some really cool stuff. Okay, so I checked earlier with everyone, and we've had 3 new people join on Zoom and 1 or 2 people join in person. So I'm just going to ask this question again. If you don't have Node installed on your computer, please raise your hand. I think everyone in here is good. I know you were here last week, so you definitely have it. Welcome, welcome. Just in time. Okay, so I'm seeing no no's explicitly. So we're just going to go ahead with the assumption that everyone already has it installed. And if you don't, we can slow down a little bit. Just let me know. And another thing I just want to get out of the way in advance, which has been the problem some weeks, is that sometimes I will go really fast and cover things and then people get lost and then they just like get up and leave because they're too far behind and they just give up. Please don't do that. It makes me feel terrible. It makes you feel terrible. Just ask the question. I'm always happy to stop. Just ask the question. We'll cover it. Everyone in here will be happy to hear the question. Don't just quit. Okay. With all that being said, we are going to start our new project. Oh my God, what's happening? Okay, so we're going to start a new project here. I'm using VS Code. You can, of course, use whatever you want. But I am going to create a folder on my desktop where we can put this system. I have a projects folder, so I'm going to create a new file and we'll call this, I don't know, we'll just call this React Workshop. And then I'll go back into VS Code and we'll open that up. So it was under projects and okay. Of course, you can name this whatever. It does not matter what you name the folder. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to run a command that will create us a new React application. So there's a lot of configuration that goes into actually setting it up. So much so that someone has been very kind to just give us a command that will do it all for us. What we're going to do is we're going to run npx create React app, and then we're going to give it a name, and we'll call this workshop. So this command is going to create us our new React project, and it's going to take a really long time. So, okay, read me your error.
It said that NPX is not recognized.
npx. If you run node space dash dash, okay, so let's do this. I'll cancel out here. If you run this command, check the node version, does that give you something or does that also cause an error?
Yeah, it's still giving me an error.
Okay, so then you probably do not actually have it installed correctly on your device.
Okay.
So I would go back to Node. I don't know exactly what the website is, and try and install it fresh. And if you can get that, then you should be good. If you're getting an error running anything with Node or npm or npx, then you probably don't have it installed correctly.
Should I uninstall my current version?
If Node isn't recognized, then it's probably just not installed at all. So you should just install it again.
Uninstall it?
You don't have to uninstall it. It'll uninstall itself if there is something there. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going for now, and then if when you catch back up, I can get you up to speed, no problem. Okay. So we're gonna create a React app and we'll call it workshop here. And it's gonna do a lot of things, and it's gonna create a lot of files and folders on the side. And we're just, what? Oh. Oh, this again. I had issues with this in the past, and I don't remember how I fixed it. This time. Come on. Okay. Troubleshooting number 1 of the workshop. We love this. Okay. So we're going to modify this a little bit. So if you're getting the same issue, or even if you're not, put an addendum on the end of create React app. And we need at latest. At latest. Workshop, and then -- use npm. Okay, so this is the whole command we're going to run, and this one should work. Hopefully. You're gonna have to close out Visual Studio and then go back in. Okay. I think Visual Studio terminal is a little strange. Like you can install something, and until you like restart Visual Studio, or sometimes your entire computer, it doesn't actually register on the terminal VS Code. So try and go like close it and go back in, and then if that doesn't work, you may have to restart your whole computer and then try it again.
Okay, I got it.
You got it?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so this is going to take a while. How many of you guys have it already finished, and how many of you are waiting on it to finish? Finished, mostly finished. Okay, I gotta wait for mine to finish, and we'll wait over here. Yes, there's going to be a lot of stuff on the left that's generated, and we'll talk about what each of them mean in a second. But that's part of the reason why we have this command specifically, so that it can do all the hard work for us. So the really cool thing about React is that it's a way of rendering pages where anytime you make a change to like the internal state of your application, like something that your application is holding, like a piece of data, the way that you've laid it out, it only re-renders components that are related to that specific piece of data. So you can create entire layouts with no HTML and CSS, only with JavaScript. And then you can design your thing so that everything is sort of modularized into a single component. And then when things relate to that component change, the component re-renders. So it does a lot of really cool things for you. We'll show how that all works. What's up? Is it like an actual error, or is it just like giving you like warning? Oh, okay. So I'm sure there's probably a better way. So this command up at the top here, there's something got changed with Create React App in like the last year or so, and basically that's like individual command doesn't work anymore. So you need this whole command. So we need to specify that we want to use whatever the latest version of that to Create React App is, and then the little flag at the end. Okay. Let me know when you have that typed in so I can scroll down. There's nothing else above this, me screwing things up over and over again. This is the only command that's important. Are you having some other issue?
I have
No, I just created a folder and I got a re-enter. So npm create.
Yes, this whole line, you can write it word for word. It'll generate your program. It is going to take a while. It is an unavoidable truth of existence that React takes a while. So that's a flag at the end. I don't actually know what that flag does, but Stack Overflow told me it was important. So we listen to Stack Overflow. They know better. Yeah. Laptops in general are much slower at generating these than a full desktop. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and keep running and start talking about these folders. I know some of you are still generating it, but also many of you guys have been waiting for several minutes now. So we're just going to go for it. So eventually you'll see all these messages saying you successfully created your folder, all that jazz. And we'll talk about how to actually make it work in a second. But basically you should have 7 different things that it's generated here. So the git ignore and the readme are specifically for if you're pushing this to GitHub. Most of you will probably use GitHub by now, but if you haven't, the readme is just a way of describing your project. And then the git ignore is anything that you don't want to push. The really important things here are a public folder. So the public has everything related to your base HTML page. Most of this we will get rid of at some point. I just want to show you that it exists before we get rid of it. Your source folder is where all of the base files for your React project go. And basically every time you create something, you're going to put it in that source folder because that's where your actual app is being generated. There's lots of things in here. It all starts from your index.js file. So this is getting the root element in your HTML page and then putting all of your React elements inside of it. So everything starts from index.js and then your main app is defined in app.js. And the way that React works is that we basically define a bunch of different components, which we compose of lots of different HTML elements. And we can choose how our components are organized, what's inside of each component, and then we compose them into a full page that we can interact with, however we want our thing to work. There's not really anything super special about this base project that's been generated. We can actually see what this base project looks like if we open the terminal. We try and open the terminal. Okay, so I'm in the React work project folder, but it generated this subfolder where all of our React things are. So make sure you're in that. We can cd into there, which just changes directory. And then we can run npm start to actually have our React app run. And it should open the browser automatically so you can see what this React app looks like. Mine will probably take a while. Progress. There we go. Okay, so awesome. So this was our old project that I forgot to close. It should be opening in a new tab shortly. So it's still starting. Yours are going to be much faster than mine because my computer is doing a lot more things at once. And this is the same thing that I learned when I tried to give this presentation at the hackathon, and it went very badly because the demo, we just could not even get started in a reasonable amount of time. Come on, you can do it. I believe in you. Okay, finally, compiled successfully. You can view the workshop in the browser. It'll give you the URL that you can use to view it locally. And this is it. So this is what they give you pre-generated. We're going to get rid of literally all of this because we don't care about any of it. But basically, it's just a combination of some sort of public assets. So icons and pictures in our public folder. And in our source folder, a component that actually puts all of that together. So you can see there's an image, which is our logo, and then the actual text and a link. And we can see all of that here, the image, the text, the link. So they're just defining a layout in our JavaScript, in our React component, and putting it all together. There are a couple of other things that I want to point your attention to before we actually get started to kind of define how your React project is structured. So there's two files down here that you probably have never heard of before called package.json and package.lock.json. And these are your configuration files for determining what your project is and everything that is required for your project to work. So I'm going to close this for a second so we can see the whole thing. So a JSON, for anyone who's not super familiar with JavaScript, is just a JavaScript object, but we've put it in its own file, and it's sort of a standard format for arranging information, especially when you're passing it between different services on the web. So we have a lot of properties and a lot of values to those properties. We have a name, a version, whether this is private. If it's not private, then NPM will let you publish it to other people. So you can create Node packages for other people to use. And there's a dependencies section. So your React project by itself does nothing unless you have dependencies. There's a lot that have been included already. One dependency for Node is React, which actually lets us run our actual front end here. It defines everything about React and how it all interacts with our code. React DOM, it stands for Document Object Model, and it's sort of the way that you can structure elements within a page. So different HTML elements inside of each other. This is also just a miscellaneous library that we won't really interact with directly. And then it also installs a package called React Scripts. And React Scripts is actually the next section down here. So scripts are how we actually run our project. This package.json in any Node.js project, whether it's React or just something else entirely, it will always have a package.json, and we always have to tell it, how do we want our thing to actually run? We can create lots of different scripts to run it in different ways. So people will usually have a script for running in a development mode where maybe there's certain tools that are helpful for developers when you're actually writing it and not when it's released to the public. There'll be regular like start scripts for when it is actually running in a production server. These are just the base scripts. You can customize these. Literally anything that you can run in a terminal, you can put as a script, and then you can interact with it. So some people make starting scripts that are like many characters long, and you only have to write npm start. And it just saves you a lot of time from having to run a whole command to get everything up and running. React Scripts handles pretty much everything we would want for our React projects. Has anyone heard of TypeScript or used TypeScript before? TypeScript is like a superset of JavaScript that basically lets you implement types into your code so that you know what variables are. One really frustrating part of JavaScript is that there are no types on variables. So you, like, if you're using it, you have no idea what's actually going to be in there. But TypeScript allows you to firmly say, I can only put this kind of thing in a variable. And it really helps you, the developer, identify what this thing is supposed to do. And with TypeScript, you would have to put extra things in these scripts so that you could actually compile all of that code before you run it. So that's where scripts come in. You need to customize your script to do whatever work you want before you run the project. And then all the stuff at the bottom, we're going to ignore. This is just other configuration options for running our projects. So that covers the package.json. We also have the package lock.json. And this you should never write in directly. This should always be generated for you. And what this is this is a specific organization of all of your packages that you've installed, their versions, how they interact with other packages, what other packages they require to work. Anytime that you install a package, it's going to update the package lock.json for you. And this is important to put on your repository if you're sharing this with other people so that everyone has the exact same configuration when they're running it. But one thing that you don't put on a repository is this folder up here called Node modules. And Node modules is where literally all of your packages that you've installed go. And with a React app, there's probably hundreds, which is just so much information that you cannot upload it to a Git repository because it's too much. So this is also pre-generated for you. And you'll notice that it's kind of grayed out in my VS Code. And the reason why is because the basic git ignore says that we should not push our node modules to Git. And that's why it's grayed out for me. It might be grayed out for you, I don't know. But that folder you never want to share with other people, because anytime that you install something or when someone clones your code, you can run npmi and it will install all the packages for you. So you don't have to share that folder. It will also generate for you. Okay, does anyone have any specific questions about any of the files I just went over before we start actually making something? Yes, so versions are really funky. Every single dependency will have sort of like our project here specifies what version of all these dependencies we want. But all of these dependencies also have package.json that specifies what version of other dependencies they need to function. So sometimes when you install things, they might think that they are looking for different versions of the same thing, or maybe they do actually need different versions. So there's certainly cases where there'll be errors when you're installing and it'll say like, you need to update to a new version or change your package.json. There is a lot of that. But if you can always force it if you think that it's not actually a problem.
And then when I force install it gives me prompt like vulnerable.
Yes, it does that all the time.
What is that?
Vulnerable, I think, mostly means that some version of a package is really old and maybe there was a security flaw detected with it, but the package you're using that depends on it hasn't upgraded to a new version yet. So there's long chains of dependencies and there's a lot of things that we have no control over. Usually if there's something that's vulnerable, it's probably nothing you can handle. When you install packages, you basically always install the newest version. So that's all you can really do. Okay. Seeing no other questions, we're going to jump right into this. And the way that we're going to jump in is by deleting everything. So let's go into the public folder here. And we can get rid of everything except the index.html. That has to stay. So you can select everything else and delete it. So this index.html is the base definition of our site. So every HTML page has to have all of these like basic declarations. And the way that React works is if we scroll all the way down here, there's a body section. And the body section of an HTML page is where all of your elements are. And React takes all of the JavaScript you've written and boils it down into a list of elements and then inserts it directly into the body. So this page still needs to be there so that we can actually have something to insert it into. But we don't care about most of this. There's also a couple of links in here that no longer exist since we just deleted them. So this favicon.ico we deleted, so we need to get rid of anything that references it. Same thing here, logo 192 we deleted. And then the manifest file down here, which is just some general information about our site. We're not putting this on the App Store or on, publishing it, so we should get rid of our manifest.json. Okay, and so that's everything. Anything that you deleted in the public folder that is referenced in this index.html needs to go. So there were a couple of links in this header section related to like favicon and logo and manifest.json. I think there were 3 things that we deleted. When you try and run it, it will let you know if you didn't delete something that you should have. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And then we're going to go into our source folder and we're also going to clear all of this out. So our app.css is a way of providing styles to our specific components. We can do it either in line with the components as we're defining them, or we can do them in a separate file. In an actual like production environment, you probably want to separate them if you have lots of stylings, but for our case, we're not going to style literally anything, so we can get rid of this. Another thing that you can do with React is you can test all of your components to make sure that they actually look correctly and they function correctly. And if you're making an actual production site or you're creating components for other people to use, testing is really important, but we're not doing that. So we're going to get rid of our app.test.json as well. And we'll get rid of this other CSS file. Index.js and app.js we have to keep because those are where our React app starts. This logo.svg, an SVG is a way of defining an image so that it scales. It literally just defines a pattern and then it grows and shrinks it as needed. But we don't need that here. And then our web vitals is just a way of setting up monitoring about our website, which we also don't care about. And then the setup tests is where our testing would start if we had any. Whew, deleted everything. We're not quite done though, because if you go into index.js, you'll notice that we're still referencing a couple of things that we just deleted. So this index.css no longer exists. So we delete this line. our web report vitals.javascript, we delete that line because that doesn't exist either. And if we go into app.js, we scroll all the way up to the top, we're importing app.css and logo.svg, and neither of those exist. So we get rid of them. And because we got rid of the logo, there's an image over here. Actually, you know what? We're just going to clear this out entirely. We're going to leave this div with the app, but everything inside you can just get rid of. We're just starting from a blank page, and then we'll work from there. And if you do this, web report vitals, you are absolutely right. So there's also a line down here. Since we got rid of web report vitals, we need to get rid of that. Okay, so we're going to do something really quick, just because I don't want to have to constantly start and stop my terminal, because last time I tried to do that, it took like literally 10 minutes to run. So we're going to install our first Node package to help us develop a little bit simpler. So we're going to go into the terminal and wait for it to load very, very slowly and painfully. And I'm going to close my terminal where the actual project is running for now. Oops. If you have a project running, you can hit Control-C while highlighted your terminal, and it'll stop the project, which is what we want to do for now. And we're going to install our first Node package. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to run npm I, and then we can specify where we want to save it. So there's two types of dependencies. There's a dev dependency section and a regular dependency section. Our dev dependencies is anything that we are using while we're developing, but will not be used when our thing is actually deployed somewhere. The dependency section is anything that is integral for your site to actually function and will be used even in production. What we're going to do is we're going to install something called Nodemon, which basically just automatically reloads our project every time we make a change to a file, which is really helpful for us because we don't have to constantly start and stop the project over and over again. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to do npm I, and then we're going to do --, which means we're adding a flag, and we're going to do save-dev. So our flag means we're saving it to dev dependencies. If we wanted to save it to regular dependencies, we could just do --save. We're going to save it to dev, and then we're going to install Nodemon. And we'll wait for that to go. Very slowly, very painfully. This one should be pretty quick because it's just one package. Okay, awesome. So I don't think that did what I wanted it to do. No, it did not. Okay, I did something bad. I was not in the right folder, and so it installed outside of my workshops folder here. So if that happens, you'll notice that it installed 117 packages, which is not correct because we only installed one. So I need to go in here and select everything and then delete everything except our actual workshops folder. Because I did a boo-boo. Okay, and so I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to cd into my workshops folder, into my, like actually where the project is. And then from there, we can run npm I save dev Nodemon. And hopefully, when this finishes, it will only add one package. It'll still say audited. Audited just means there's something already installed and it's just checking to make sure everything's okay. You don't need to worry about anything that's being audited. It's not a bad thing. I don't think it does by default, Rob. It is possible that it does. The other thing about Nodemon that's nice is it will tell you anything that's potentially scary about your project. So just running npm start with the base way of writing your React app, it'll just tell you it's running, we got it. But Nodemon has a bunch of extra things in here that'll send you warnings anytime you have something in your code that might be wrong. So like if you use a double equals, which potentially could cause an issue, that there's a difference between 2 equal signs and 3 equal signs in JavaScript. 3 equals means they have to be literally the exact same thing. And 2 equals means if they're close enough, we'll say it's okay, which sometimes can cause issues. So something like that would pop up when you run with Nodemon. So I always like to stick with Nodemon, but it's possible that hot reloading works anyway. So, so now, oh my God, we still have 77 packages. I'm hoping that this is okay. Okay, everyone has like some large number of packages. Okay, great. So in that case, what we can do to make sure that this works is let's go back into our package.json. And we'll minimize this for a second. And you'll see that we now have a dev dependencies section down way at the bottom, but yours might be somewhere else. The ordering in the package.json doesn't matter. And we'll have our Node.js, and it'll give us a version, and we'll say that we're using this version or higher, which is super cool. So what we can do now is we can change our starting script here. Actually, let's not do that. Let's create another starting script. We can have as many scripts as we want, and we can have them do whatever we want. Let's create a new script called start dev, which means as we're developing, we'll use this script to run our thing. And we need to specify what do we actually want to run in our terminal. We'll run Node.js index.js. I don't know if this is going to work, but we're going to try it. I think I may have to do source/index.js. I could be wrong. So let's try it. I don't know if this is going to be it or not. So we'll go back into the terminal. And now if we run, so we can't just run npm start. Npm start is a command that's defined. But because we created our own script here, we're going to run npm run and then the name of our custom script, start dev. Yes. Okay. So we got an error here that it could not find.
Do we have to keep changing directories every time we want to have one?
Yes, and this is going to get old really fast. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to reopen my project, but I'm just going to open the right folder this time. So I'm going to go into my workshop folder. And then every time I open the terminal, it'll actually be in the right place. And I will stop forgetting every time that I have to change directories. That's it. I should have done that earlier. Okay.
Can you tell me what the code is? Run start dev.
So that's just the command. So if you get an error, you're probably in the wrong directory. Oh, you mean like what did we put in there? Yeah, so we created a script, start dev, and it's Node.js/index.js. And then in order to run that script, we do npm run and then the name of our script, which is start dev. And this needs to be the path to the index.js file. You can put the index.js file wherever you want, but it has to be able to find it. Okay, so I'm getting this error, and this is related to JavaScript and Node being a little funky. So we need to make sure there's basically like two ways of importing and handling lots of different JavaScript libraries working together. You can either use something called common JS syntax, which is where you require packages, or you can import them, which is module syntax. And we need to tell them we're going to use module syntax. So we're going to create another property in our package.json called type. And then in there, we're not going to do common.js, which is what it suggests. We're going to put module. Now, if we save, it should automatically try and reload our thing. Okay, so now we have another error. So we're going to go into, it's telling us it's in index.js. So we'll open that. So let's try this. Yeah, normally it works out of the box, but it does seem to be causing an issue this time. So let's try. No, that's not it.
I think it probably wants you to like set up like Babel and stuff because it's the JSX. That's why it doesn't like it. That's the first tag in the page, and it's not part of standard JavaScript. So you might want to just go with the regular. I tested the regular hot reload is working for me.
See if anyone else has a suggestion.
Oh, I was just gonna say what I said in my messages, but you might have to like set up Babel because I've gotten this before. The issue is that the JSX is not part of regular JavaScript syntax.
Yeah.
And so you need like plugins to make it happen. So I might just say I tested the hot reload on just if you just run the built-in React script thing and it works fine.
Okay.
You don't really get like checks or anything, but it works.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. So, so we're gonna ditch Nodemon. That was fast. Now we're just gonna go back to our npm start, which does still hot reload. However, it's not going to give us quite as many helpful messages about like warnings going on with the code, but we'll be okay with that because we care about other things more importantly right now. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and close this and let's create our first React component. So let's go back into app.js. And the way that we define a component in React is we need to create either a class or a function that is going to return a composition of things. And the old school way of doing React is you would create a class for each component and then you would handle it with like, standard JavaScript class syntax. You would have a constructor, you'd have to set like a state object. But the way that we do it in modern JavaScript, which you will see basically everywhere, is with functions. So a function is going to take in some properties. It's going to do a bunch of stuff on the inside, and then it's going to return some sort of composition of elements or other React components. So right now, all we have is a div. Let's start by creating a form so that we can take in a user's name and then call that call the API from Ageify. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to define a couple of elements here. We're going to define a form element, and we'll handle. We can give a bunch of properties. So it's going to autofill some of these. On submit, what we're going to do is not anything yet. We're just going to put a to-do in here. And we'll get back to this shortly. One interesting thing that we should talk about here is that what we're doing here by composing elements inside of other elements, it looks like HTML, right? And the reason why this syntax exists is because it's something familiar to everyone, but there are a lot of differences. This is technically called JSX. It's a way of defining our layouts with only JavaScript. So our elements are still the same. We can use other components as well, and we will declare other components shortly. But each of the properties we can specify, and then we need to sort of escape from the actual like HTML syntax so that we can write JavaScript inside to give the properties values. And the way that we do that by escaping is through a set of curly braces. Anytime you put curly braces inside of JSX, it's going to treat it as JavaScript and execute like JavaScript. So let's say that we had a function out here. Let's create a JavaScript function really quick. Let's call this say hi. I'm going to make a little bit of different syntax, and we'll talk about what this is in a second. And we'll do a console.log hello world. We haven't done enough hello world problems yet. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this form element just so that we have a second. So our function out here, let's say we want to call this function when our form is submitted. So anytime there's a submission button that's clicked, or if we click enter while on the form, it'll submit. We can define what we want to actually handle, like what function we want to handle in here. So let's call our say hi. We're not gonna put parentheses on here, because all we want to do is we want to supply a reference to the function that will be executed when this event happens, when this onSubmit event happens. If we put braces on here, what it's going to do is when it's rendering the component, it's just going to automatically execute the function, which we don't want to happen. We only want to happen when it's actually submitted. So we can test this out. We just need one other component to make it work. So let's go inside our form component and let's make a button element. So input type is equal to submit. And we can put some text in our button, say hi. Okay, so theoretically, this would be enough to make our program do what we want. Resolve app.js. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to change this import. It's telling me that I need to put a .js on the end. It's compiling and it compiles successfully. Does anyone else have any errors that we need to resolve right now? If you run npm start, we're not going to do npm start dev because Nodiman was giving us issues. But if you do npm start, everyone should have compiled successfully. And if we go in here, it's not going to show anything because of course it wouldn't. Let's put some extra text in here and see if it's actually running anything. Save, it'll auto reload. What is happening? Okay. So this should be rendered. Does anyone like actually see it rendering, or does everyone also have everything invisible on their computers? Root. Nothing. Okay. Document.getElement by ID root. Let's put a paragraph element here and see if this renders. My suspicion is that it's just not rendering anything at all. So let's go back to our public up here and make sure that we actually have a element to render into. Body div ID root. Document.getElement by ID root. I'm just going to try everything under the moon to figure out what is going on here. Since I've never had this much issue setting up a project for the first time. Okay, so it is printing. So we're having errors in our console. So if you ever are wondering what's going on, if you ever are printing to the console in a React app, you can right click and inspect the page and go up to console. So we're having issues with the input tag. So an input cannot have children, which means that I defined it incorrectly here by putting stuff inside. And instead, we need to make this a self-closing tag. So if there's nothing inside, you can just put it as an opening tag and then a slash at the end. Let's see if this does anything. Reload the page. Did I save it? No, I didn't save it. Okay, there we go. So we were just having an error with our input elements and we just didn't actually write things correctly. So now you'll see all the paragraphs we put in there, our submit button. And if we click submit here, it's going to reload the page, but it's also, you'll notice, very quickly going to type in hello world.
Can you explain the
Yes, you're right. I meant to talk about it and then I skipped over it because I got distracted by other things. So JavaScript is kind of cool. You can declare functions in two different ways. So the standard way to declare a function is with the function keyword and then your name of the function. And then your parameters, if any, which are just names. They could be literally anything and they don't have to have a type. And then an open and closing bracket and then all of your stuff in here. But again, with modern JavaScript, there's a lot of flexibility in functions that doesn't really exist with certain other more heavy duty languages. Functions can be put to a variable like anything else. We can hold a reference to a function and then call the function through that reference. And so that's basically what this is doing up here. If you've used any other language that kind of works based on event systems, there's a thing called an anonymous function. An anonymous function doesn't have a name, and we just declare what it's going to do. And the reason why we would do that is because it's a shorter syntax for a function that we're only ever going to use like one time. In events-based programming, usually you'll have an event and then you'll give it a function that you're going to call if that event happens, which is actually what's happening with this form. Like we're waiting for a submission event and then we're calling a function, but the function doesn't get used anywhere else, right? So we don't like have to give it a name and be able to reference it individually. Instead, what we do is we can create an anonymous function here. And we're putting the reference to this function inside the say hi variable. We console log say hi here. So we're looking for a log from app.js line 5. And we have to get rid of this other function because it's already been defined. And we go back in here. You'll notice that is literally printing out the function that we just defined. We're printing the reference to that function. And we can call that function at any time by invoking this variable, which stores the reference. Say hi. And now if we save this and go back in, it'll give us a hello world. So we're calling a function through a reference variable, which seems really convoluted, right? Like you could just write your function name of the function. That's totally fine if you want to do that. But this is a more standard syntax that people use these days. And the flexibility of this is that we can literally skip this say hi variable entirely and put it straight into our on submit. So again, this returns a reference, and on submit only wants a reference. It wants to know what function should I call. So we're giving it a reference to an anonymous function. It's a little convoluted, but it allows us to sort of just shorthand our function instead of having to declare it somewhere else and then call it again, because we're not going to say hi anywhere else. So if we go back in here, you'll see that it still works. We can submit and it'll say hello world. So anytime we do that arrow syntax, we're creating a function. We're just not giving it a name. We're using a little bit of special syntax just to make it a little quicker. So one other thing you'll notice is every time we click the form, it reloads the page, which is not helpful because we want to actually like see the result and we don't want the page to reload. So we can stop that by putting in a parameter in here. This on submit is an event. And anytime this event is called, it gives you a reference to the event as a parameter. So we can use that parameter to call e.prevent default. And you'll notice it'll autofill it for you. So this is the event that's happening. It's an optional parameter. If you don't care about anything related to the event, you can just leave it out. But we can call prevent default, which means whatever you were going to do, don't do it. Do what I want to do instead, which is console.log. So now if we save it first, I always forget to save. And we go back in here and we submit. It's just going to print hello world over and over again, and it doesn't reload, which is what we want. Okay, that's pretty cool, but this still doesn't do anything that we like really want. So let's do something else here. So let's create some more properties for our form so that we can let them put in their name. So I'm going to go get rid of those extra paragraphs that we created just to see what was going on, since they were just for testing. Leave them in if you want, though. And we're going to put some other things in here. We're going to put in a paragraph. Actually, no, let's not do that. Let's create another input here. Type is equal to text. So this type means what do we want our input to look like? There's lots of different types. There's numbers, there's emails, there's passwords, and they just function differently depending on what kind of thing you're putting in there. And then again, we can't put anything in our input tag, so we're just going to self-close it. And if we reload that, we now have our extra thing that we can type into, which again, doesn't do anything right now. So we need to now hook it up and do some really cool stuff. So what we're going to do is we are going to create a controlled component. So React, like right now, all we've done is define a bunch of HTML elements, right? Like that's no better than we could do with literally just HTML and a little bit of JavaScript. The really cool part of React is that you can store data as part of state within a specific component. So we can store our form data in this component and nowhere else. And then every time that changes, only the things that are important to it reload. So it's a lot more efficient than constantly having to reload the page every time something new happens. The way that we do that is we need to declare a piece of state. So a piece of state is, we can declare as many pieces of state as we want, and we can make them whatever we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a piece of state that keeps track of what that thing we typed into the input is so that we can use it somewhere else. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to declare, actually, we're not going to do that. So we're going to go up to the top here, make some space, and we're going to import, in brackets, use state from React. And theoretically, this is correct. Usually it will auto complete for you so that you can just import something and then it'll choose where the correct thing is. So I think this is right. And what we're going to do is we're going to declare one variable here, which is going to be a string, and it's going to be whatever is in our input over there. So we can call use state. And what this does is it's going to, every time this function is called, And this function is called every time the component re-renders. You'll notice that we're returning what do we want this component to look like, this specific instance that it's rendering. Every time something has to re-render, it's going to recall the function that generates that thing. So every time we regenerate, we want to get the current value of that state. And the way that we do that is we need to declare two things. We need to declare what we want to call that piece of state, and we'll call it name input, or we'll just call it name actually. And then we need to declare a function, the name of whatever function we're going to use to set a new value for it. And these can be literally anything you want. The first thing is always going to be your variable where the state is, and your second thing is always going to be the function you call to update it. But you can name them whatever you want. So let's call this set name. And then inside this use state, we need to provide a default value if the state has never been generated before. So the first time this component is ever rendered, it's going to use our default value. And then every other time this component re-renders for the rest of the existence of our site, it's going to get whatever the current value is if it can find, otherwise the default value. And let's make this just an empty string. At first, we don't want anything in there. Okay, so you might be asking, what is this? This is a really cool thing you can do in JavaScript called destructuring. You can do it for objects and you can do it for arrays. The result of this call, use state, if we highlight over, is an array of a string and then this really long thing that's really just a function. So this returns an array, and what we're doing is we're creating two variables from the pieces of our array. We're destructuring the array into individual variables. One variable is the piece of state, and then one variable is a reference to the function to set it. This is the standard syntax for use state. We could also do something like name state here and assign it to one variable, and then like const name is equal to name state 0, and then const set name is equal to name state 1. But why would you do that? Okay, so we got that. The other thing that I just want to mention here is the const keyword. There's 3 different ways that you can declare a variable in JavaScript. You can declare it with let, with var, or with const. Let and var are almost the exact same thing. The difference is just kind of scoping a little bit. Const means that you can't change your thing after you've declared it. Let and var, you can change it. There's no specific types. Generally, the advice that I have learned is that if you ever have to change something, declare it with let, and if you don't, always declare it with const. I just skip over var, but if you did like a JavaScript interview with the company, they will ask you the difference. So you definitely should do some research on that at some point. So const just means we're not going to change it. These values are going to stay the exact same for the rest of our rendering. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to set the value of our text input to be whatever name currently is. So again, name is a JavaScript variable. We can't just do value equal to name because it's expecting a string. So if we want to use a JavaScript value, we have to declare it inside of curly braces. And that's really cool. But it doesn't actually work how we expect. So if we go in here, you'll notice that there's an error here. We're going to ignore and pretend that didn't happen. But if we try and type in here, nothing's going to happen. And the reason why is every time this component re-renders, we are forcing it to only contain whatever is currently in our state. But that is always an empty string. We haven't ever changed it. So regardless of what we type, nothing's going to happen. So what we need to do is we also need to specify a onChange property, which is another event like onSubmit. And then we need to give it a function that we can use to actually change the value. I think we can, I don't think we can just use set name because I don't know exactly what the parameters of this submission are. It's quite likely that one of the parameters would be the event, and so we'd be setting the event. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare another function right inside here with our anonymous function syntax. You could also declare the function somewhere else. Like you could declare it over here. We could declare a function and then call the function, but we're just going to do shorthand. And inside, all we're going to do is set name. I don't know exactly what the parameters are here. So we're gonna try something here. I I think actually what we need is we need E. So whatever we're going to call our event, we could call this event, we could call this E. And then we're going to do E.target.value. And we'll save that. It'll auto format because I have a formatter on here. It may not format for you. But this is our function here. So we take one parameter, which is the details of the event, and then we set the name to be whatever the value of the input is. The target of this event is the input because that's where the event is happening. So we're taking the value from it. And so now if we go back in here, oh, I did say that. I'm way ahead of the game. Now if we type in here, we get all kinds of cool things. And we can validate that it's actually storing the correct instance of state by doing console.log here. And we'll log the value of name. And you'll notice every time we type, it will put a new thing in here. So this console.log here is at the top level of our function, which means every time this component is re-rendered, it's calling this console.log, which you'll notice is happening a lot. But if we didn't change state, it would be happening none. State is the way that you determine whether something's going to re-render or not. Anytime your state changes, that component is automatically going to re-render. So when we call that set name function, it's changing that state value, and the component has to re-render with a new value. If you have just like a normal thing here, like we can declare like number 3, and let's maybe say that on submit or on change, we want to set number equal to 5 instead. And this needs to be a let because we're changing it. Or let's even do something a little bit better. Let's do number plus equal to 2. And let's see what this does. So our number here is 3. And we'll console.log number here so we can actually see it. Sorry, I'm indecisive. Let's not do it here. Let's console.log right under number here. So if you were not wise to the way that state works, you might think that every time we update this number, it's going to add it. And then when it re-renders, it's going to add it over and over and over again. But that is not going to happen. So what happens here is that every time we type in a character, it's going to print 3, and it's always going to print 3. So if we declare a variable that is not state, it's going to redefine it every single time to be your default value. If you want something that is persistent every time it re-renders, it has to be state, and you have to set it manually. But it is certainly helpful to have constants sometimes, and you can declare those inside your function, but they will get reset every re-render. It's just something that you need to know so that when you do it by accident, you can identify what's going on. Okay, so that was really cool. So let's actually use that Ageify API so that you can see how all of this hooks together. There is a base JavaScript function called fetch, which allows you to perform literally any like query to another service anywhere on the internet. The syntax is a little bit complicated, and I prefer using a different package that kind of makes it a little bit simpler to see what's happening. So we're going to npm I something else. So let's go in here. Let us go ahead and terminate this. We're going to run npm I, and we're going to do save, because this is something we're going to use in our actual code, not just for development. And we're going to install something called Axios. Axios is another package that helps with making calls to other services. And it's a little bit easier syntax to understand. And personally, I just like it more than fetch. So we're going to use that. So it should install things, added one package, which is great. And once you have that, we can go back into our app.js. And so what we want to do is we want to, when this submits, we want to make a call to that Ageify service and pass it the current value of our name, and then get back something in return. And I haven't actually shown you what Ageify is. And the reason why we're using Ageify is because it was the only like free and really easy to set up API call that I could find. If we go to ageify.io, it gives lots of documentation here. And it's really simple. All we have to do is just send a request to this one URL and provide a name at the end, and then it will give us back a number. So let's put this in a new tab. We can do this from our browser too. We're going to automate it to do in our actual service. We can do it from the browser, no problem. So if we go to this URL, with name equal Michael, it'll give us back this object that has the name and then the age and then how many times, I would assume this is how many times it's been searched. I don't actually know. But this is how like exchanges work on the web. Your front end will make a request to some service that has been set up, which might be your backend team, might be like a totally different backend. And then you'll send data to it and you'll get data in response. And there's lots of different requests that you can make. The one that we're going to use is a GET request. A GET request just means that I want to retrieve information from you. And you can specify where the information should come from. You can make a POST request, which means I'm going to send the server information. You can make a delete request, which means there's something on the server that I want you to delete. There's a couple of others that are not really useful, but those are the big three to know. So we're going to make a GET request with Axios to this URL. So let us go in here, and we need to define a function that's actually going to perform this for us. So we're going to define a new function. We're going to call this getAge, and we'll use our anonymous function syntax again. And we don't need to pass any parameters in here because we already have access to the name, which is the only thing that we really care about for this. We want to get the age of that name. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to import Axios here. Have a great weekend. So we're going to import Axios up here like this. So the name of the package and then the thing from the package we're exporting. You'll notice that there's a difference here between an import with braces and an import with no braces. The import with braces means that this file has lots of different things that it's exporting, and you need to choose which specific thing from that file you want. If there's no braces, it means there's literally only one default export, and you can name it whatever you want. We could name this Bob, and that would totally work because there's only one thing. If there's lots of things, you need to have the specific name of the thing you want. So we're going to call it Axios because that's what it is. And what we're going to do in this function is we're going to make an Axios.get request. And there's two things that go into a GET request. The first is the URL of the service that we want to query. And then the second is all the data that we want to send. And we send that in the format of a JavaScript object. So a JavaScript object, we talked about it way at the beginning with the JSON file. It's basically just it's curly braces that say this is an object, and then a lot of properties and values. So we can define a property in here called name, or let's actually talk about several ways we could do this first. So the best way of doing this would be like, give it the name property, and then the value we want to pass is our name object. So this is always the name of our thing, the name of our property. We can call this whatever we want. And then the value we want to put in here is the variable name. We can actually shorthand this though. If these are the exact same thing, what we can do is we can literally just put name in here, and it will take whatever is in the name variable, and it will also put it under a key that is named name. That was a mouthful. So this is just shorthand for name : name, which is interesting more than anything. And you might be asking, why are we calling this property name? Well, the reason is because the API that we're calling specifies, it does not specify that. Okay, I led you astray. We're not actually going to do this. So lots of GET requests will have you submit an object with a bunch of properties that you want to get. But there's two ways that you can get something. So the way that we're going to do it is through a query parameter. So let us, I'm going to copy this just out so I don't have to type it out, but you can type this out manually. So the URL that we're going to get is https://api.ageify.io. And we need a slash at the end. And we can either send our data as a body to our request, which is that object format that we just did. But this API has specified that instead of an object, it wants query parameters. So query parameters are just a way of sending in specific pieces of data that are always going to be a part of your request. And so the way we can do that is we put a question mark at the end, and then the name of our query parameter, which is going to be name. That's what it's telling us we need to put in here. And then we need to put the actual value of our state. So we could do string concatenation here. The cool way of doing this, though, and we enjoy doing things cool ways, is through a template string. If you've ever used Python, you might have used template strings before. But a template string is this tilde mark, which is in the top left corner of your keyboard. It is not an apostrophe, and it is not, oh, sorry, it's not a tilde. It's the other thing on the key with the tilde. The tilde is the squiggly one, and then this is the, I don't know what this is. It's like a tick mark. But a template string lets us literally insert JavaScript directly into the string. We can resolve the JavaScript like without having to do a bunch of concatenation. The way that we put JavaScript in here is with a, what is this called? A $, and then an open and closing bracket. And then we put what thing we want in here. We could call a function in here, and the return of that function would be put into the string. We can put a variable, the value of that variable would put in the string. We do a lot of cool things. If this isn't highlighted for you, you're probably using the wrong string bounders. Apostrophes and quotes in JavaScript are both equally valid for strings because there is no such thing as a character. But for a template string, you have to use the special tick mark thing. Okay, so I actually missed that we need a equal sign in here. And let's just check to make sure that's correct. Okay, that looks good to me. And what we're going to do is we are going to then, okay, so this is where JavaScript gets a little tricky. So I don't know how many of you guys have experience with asynchronous programming, but asynchronous programming is like pretty much how you do anything with JavaScript. So asynchronous means that we are going to call something, it's going to go off and do its own thing, and then it's going to get back to us at a later date. We don't know when that'll be. So if you highlight over axios.get here, you'll see that the return, so this is the function and then the parameters, and then the return is the last thing. The return is a promise. And in JavaScript, a promise means this is the type of value that I'm going to give you, but I'm not going to give it to you right away. So you need to tell me what I need to do until then. There's lots of different ways that we can work with asynchronous programming. One of them is using the await keyword. Await means that I'm going to pause the execution of this function until this gets back to me, which won't take a long time. But if you have something that's, it has a lot of calls, then that might be a problem. If you use the await keyword here, like we would say response or res equal to await axios.get. And if we do this, we need to declare this function as an asynchronous function. So anytime you have an await keyword in a function, the parent function has to be declared as asynchronous so that everything else knows that this function is going to take some time to execute. It's not just going to go and finish automatically. It's going to, have some asynchronous operation inside. So we could do this. This would totally work. And let's actually stick with this, and then we'll talk about the alternatives once we see that this actually works. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare another piece of state here, and we're going to call this age and set age. Use state, and we'll call this 0. So this state can be literally anything. We could make it an array. We can make it an object. We can make it null. But since this is a number, we'll put it as 0. Okay, and what we're going to do is with this response, we're going to get res.data. Actually, let's not do that first. So let's first make sure that our response is correct. So one cool thing about responses is that there's a status code on every single response. The status code tells you what happened. If it's a 200 status code, res.status code, or just status equal to 200, then this means it worked successfully. If it is not 200, if it's like a 400 or a 500 value, it'll tell you what kind of error is happening, and then it'll also give you a message as part of the data. So else we'll console.log res.data. So if we have some kind of error, it will send the data to the console. So if it worked, and only if it worked, we want to set age res.data and let's check what the format was. So when we ran this up here, it gave us our response object, and it's going to have 2 properties. It's going to have a name property, which is just what we gave it, and then age, 3 properties, sorry, and then count. So let's make another one for count, just because. Set count. And we will set age to be res.data.age. And then we will set count to be res.data.count. And if you weren't sure what format this res response was going to hold, then you could console.log it. One really cool thing about console.log for responses is that it'll give you it'll give you everything about the response, all the properties, and you can see like what do you actually need to access. So if we go back into our React app, which actually isn't running because I closed it, so we'll have to run npm start again. This will take a while. Does anyone have any errors or anything while we're waiting on this to run? Any issues?
Well, question earlier. So when you do a e.prevent default, how does that stop it from just loading the page every time?
So the default action of a form is when you submit it, it's going to submit the data somewhere and then it's going to reload the page, because the typical program, like if you define like an HTML page, the only way for it to change is by reloading the page and then like basically like reevaluating all of the elements with the result of whatever your submission is. It's the default thing that this HTML page, because again, it's HTML, like we're writing JavaScript, but it all gets boiled down to HTML, is to reload the page. That's the default value. Different events will have different default actions, but for submission, it's reloading the page. So we're calling the function that's going to say, scrap all that. And then after that, we can define what we want to do instead. Yeah, so it's a parameter in JavaScript. You can call it whatever you want. It will pass an object to that parameter, but you can call the parameter whatever you want. So E is just really short.
So it just passes whatever like is in that.
Yeah, it's just going to pass an object. Because the type doesn't matter, like you just name whatever the parameter is. There can be other parameters as well. Like if you had 3 parameters passed to a function, you can call them whatever you want, but the data that you pass in will be whatever is stored in that thing that you just named. So we can call it E, we can call it event, we can call it EV for short for event, literally anything. Okay. I'm realizing now that I forgot to actually call the function. So I was going to test it, but it's not going to do anything. So let's go back to our form.onSubmit here. And instead of hello world, let's call that getAge function. And so now every time that we click submit, it's going to take whatever is currently in the state and it's going to submit it and it's going to get back to us. So let's type in your own name and we'll submit. And we printed res, which you'll see there's a lot of different properties of this response object. There's configuration for like how the response is being sent. There's headers, which define like important information about like authentication and whatnot. There's the actual like details about the request, but there's also this data property, which is all the stuff that's coming back, the age, count, and name. And you'll notice up top that that's what we got from. We got res.data.age and res.data.count. Okay, so these variables are updated. We can't actually see them because we haven't defined anything to show them yet. So let's do something that is a little bit unnecessary, but we're going to do it for the point of making a point. We're going to create a new React component so you can see how you can create other components and put them inside. So we're going to create a new file in our source folder, and we'll call this display. And this is where we're going to display that age, name, and count. So what we need to do is we need to define our function that's going to generate the components. We'll call this display. And it's just a function. And then we need to export it so that other components can have access to it. So we're going to export default, which means we're only exporting one thing. And then we're going to export the display here, which right now is nothing, but it will be something short. So let's put a temporary thing in here to do just so that we know that it hasn't been done yet. So we're just going to put literally anything in there. I'm just going to put some text. And we can use that component from our other component by importing it first. So if we import display, it should help us out. But I guess it's not going to. Usually when you start typing in import, it'll find it for you, but it seems like it's not going to do that. So Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to open up here. And if it's a package, you just write the name of the package. But if it's a JavaScript file, you need to locate it. And we specify that we're looking for JavaScript with /. And then it's in the same file level, so we don't have to go up at all. If we needed to go up, we could do .. and then stuff like that. But since it's in the same level, we just do / and then display.js. And so that will import our component. And now we can insert that component into our thing here. Let's put it underneath the form. And the way that we define any of our React components is the same as an HTML tag, basically. So we're going to create a tag and we're going to call this display. And since we're not going to put anything inside of it here, we're going to put all of the content inside in that other file. We can just self-close the tag right here. So one really important thing to know is that you can only have one parent element in a React component. So our div right here is the parent element. If I take this and I put it underneath the div, well, now we're returning two parent elements, the div and the display. You can't have that. So if you ever need to bundle things together, just put it in a div. The div can be your parent element. Divs are invisible, which is really helpful for just grouping things together. Okay, so if we save this, you'll notice over here that we now have our to-do, which is that paragraph that we put in there. And we need to actually put some really cool stuff in here. So what are we going to do here? We're going to use this display to show our name, our count, and our age. We could put this just directly in this app.js component, but that's no fun. So we're gonna put it in a separate component. And you might be asking, how are we going to get that over there? Because they're in separate components. They can't just like communicate with each other. So there's no like ongoing communication channel. And the way that React handles passing information is through composition. So we compose components of other components and pass down properties into each component. So what do we want to pass into our display? We can name whatever properties we want. We can create our own properties. We can use properties that already exist. One property that already exists on basically everything is a style component or a style property. We could define like CSS styles in there. But we're going to create our own. We're going to create a name property, and we're going to give it whatever's currently in our name state. We're going to define an age property. We're going to give it whatever is in age. And then we're going to define a count property and give it whatever is in count. So we're passing 3 different properties into our display component. And so these all have default values. If you ever had something that could potentially be null or undefined, that might cause an issue. And in which case you would want to pass something else if that thing was not defined. And the way you can do that is through a ternary operator. So let's say maybe this name could be null. We could check if name is not null, pass it name, otherwise pass it a default value. That is valid JavaScript. Basically, we're taking advantage of the fact that JavaScript can evaluate any variable as a Boolean. So if it has a non-empty value, then it will be true and we can pass it the name. If it is empty or if it's undefined, then it will fail this and it will pass an empty string. But we don't have to worry about that, so we're going to leave that out. I just wanted to point that out. And the way that we're going to receive these properties is through defining a props parameter to our component. And so this props parameter is a way that React bundles all of the properties together, and then we expand them back out inside of our component, whichever ones we care about. So there's a really, really like smooth syntax that we're going to use. You could literally define each thing independently, like name is equal to props.name, and then do the same thing for age. But we're going to do another destructuring thing. So we did array destructuring earlier, taking an array and expanding them into each variable. We're going to do the same thing with objects. So this is an object. We're going to take each property in the object and expand it to its own variable. It's like a really cool syntax that it's kind of, it makes me feel happy when I'm writing JavaScript more than anything. So we take our thing. So this has to resolve to an object, which it is an object already. And we can take each property that we think the object is going to have and take the value of that property into its own variable. So the properties that we gave are name, age, and count. So we define a variable for name, for age, and for count. And if it finds those properties, it's going to assign the value to this name, age, count variable in this component. But that might not always be the case. Maybe sometimes someone will pass only some of the properties, or maybe it's like a Boolean value, where if you see a property, then you think that something is true, and if you don't see a property, it's false. So we can define a default value for each of these properties by doing an equal sign and then the value for if that property is not found, what should we store in that variable? This is always safe. I would always recommend you do it, even if you think it will never come into play. It's just helpful to make sure that nothing goes wrong with your thing. If the property does exist, it will use that value instead. If it doesn't exist, it will use the defaults. Okay, and now we can define our layout here. Let's make this, I don't know, we'll make this a div. And let's add a style in here just for fun. One interesting thing about styles in React is that you can actually define them through an object. If you've written CSS, like it's sort of the same syntax where you have like, properties and the values. But if you write a style tag in an HTML element directly, normally you have to specify it as a string. But with React, there's a style property and you can pass it a JavaScript object. So these outer curly braces mean that whatever's inside is JavaScript. And then these inner curly braces means I have defined an object of all of the styles that I want. So let's add a background color. I'll make this green, or actually yellow, I think will be more pleasant. And let's maybe set an outline here to be 2 pixels solid and black, just so that we can see that this div is non-trivial. And you'll see that currently there's nothing inside, so it looks really wonky, but we can put some stuff in there later. Thanks for coming. Actually, you sent that 2 minutes ago, so you're probably gone. All right, so let's put some stuff in here. So inside of our div, we will put an H4 element, which is a header. So there's different kinds of headers. There's an H1, which is the biggest header, and I think H6 is the smallest. And we'll put the name in here. So if we put just name, it's going to assume that this is text. The way, again, that we make sure that we use the JavaScript property name is by opening and closing curly braces and then putting the thing that we want in there. And so that will insert the value of name into this header. We can do the same thing below. Let's maybe make this an H6, and we'll call this, this will be our age. And then we'll do another H6 here. We'll do this as count. And we can mix this with text as long as it's outside of our JavaScript curly braces. So we could say queried name space, and then the JavaScript insertion, expected age, and then number of queries. Okay, and so now if we reload this page, we can see that this is pretty cool. I'm gonna actually make this box smaller. Let's set the width of this to be a fixed value of, I don't know, 300 pixels. Oop, that's not pixels. Okay, so now it's smaller. Actually, this is really small, so I'm gonna change these up. We'll make this an H1 and we'll make this an H3, H3. Close the closing tags here. Okay, and so now if we go back in here, this is the last query we did for Eli. We can type another name in here. We'll go for Sarah maybe. And you'll notice that the name updates automatically because that always gets changed as soon as our input gets changed. But the actual age and queries only gets updated when we submit, and we call that API. So when we submit, it'll change these values. Sarah is apparently 33 years old. And a lot more people care about how old Sarah is than Eli. So that's fun. Maybe it's for Bob. We got really cool stuff. So anytime you have something, usually components are for a specific purpose, and you create components so that they are reusable. Make your components as general as possible, and then use properties to pass in values to make them more specific. There's no right way to compose components. Composition of components is why React is not trivial. It's up to you to figure out what is an appropriate way to structure your site. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I want to cover. Does anyone have anything else, any questions or anything that you want to see how you could do it?
How would we make it so the query name only changed to one?
That's a good question. So I think what we would need to do for that is, because we're passing in the name property every time, we would need to have like a separate state variable that holds the last name we searched and then update that every time we search and pass that instead. So let's do that really quick. Let's do another state variable like last name search. That gives the wrong implication. Searched name set last searched name use states. And then over here where we get all this stuff back, we can set last search name to be whatever name we have. So we could get it from the response object, or we can just use whatever the current value of state is here. Instead of passing that name, which is being changed with the input, because the name is what we're using building the query here, we're just going to pass the last search name instead. Last searched name is equal to, actually, you know what? Let's put it directly in the name because it doesn't care about what the actual current value of name is. So now if we save this, we can type in anything we want here and it won't update automatically, but when we hit submit, it'll set that value and then it only has the most recent thing. Someone else raise their hand.
So you're recording, first off, are you gonna upload these files?
There is already a GitHub repository on the link tree that I will leave up for the rest of the night, which has this plus another thing that I was thinking we could potentially get to, but we're not even close to getting to, so I'm just going to leave it out.
All right. Yeah. Another, is it, you said you have like a thing that organizes code, is it prettier soon?
Yes. So VS Code is really, really cool. I have installed an extension called Prettier, which basically just lets you format your code every time you save it, if it's valid. If there's an error, it won't reformat. So you can actually like notice there's an error, but it's really, really helpful for like, you can write something all in one line and then it'll indent it for you rather than you having to like indent and go back and fix everything that like gets messed up when you delete stuff. So you can install that through VS Code with the extensions section and then go into your settings and preferences. And then if you search for Prettier here, once it's installed, there's lots of different settings about like how it's going to format your code. And there's a little tab in the bottom here that actually isn't showing right now, but there'll be like a little thing here that when Prettier is running, it'll show that Prettier is being used to actually format. And if it's not, then you can set it as your default formatter. I would highly recommend it. You can also create something called a Prettier RC file, which actually, let me see if I can find one really quick. I think I have one in my DBMS project. But Prettier only works on your specific VS Code, but you can define a file way down at the bottom here called Prettier RC, which has all of those same things about how Prettier is working, but it's for this specific project. So if you're working with other people and submitting to GitHub and they have Prettier, then it has the same formatting for everyone rather than like someone using tabs and someone having using spaces. And so every time you save the file, it goes back and forth. Any other questions?
Could you show your display that?
Absolutely. Oh, I'm in the wrong thing. Display.js. Yeah. Let me know when you're good with display.js. Okay, so we're gonna go back in here. So what we had done previously is we had passed in the name property down here, which gets changed every time that the input gets changed. So when the input is changed, it sets the new value of name. So what we did instead is we created a separate thing that only updates when you search. So when this getAge function runs, it sets the new value of last search name. And then instead of passing the name state value that's getting changed over and over again, we just pass that thing instead. So this is where it's defined. This is where we set it. And then you just replace it in the actual component that you're rendering.
Do you have to put async for
So if you're going to use the await keyword, you have to declare your function as asynchronous, because like other functions that are calling it have to know that I can't wait on you to finish. await, it's gonna like, the process of getting could take an arbitrary amount of time. So other functions have to know, I just need to skip ahead and not wait for you, which is why you have to declare something as asynchronous. I was going to show you the other way of handling promises. I'll just like show you generally how it looks. We could also call axios.get and then copy this whole thing in here. And the other way that we can handle promises is by using a then call on the end, which takes in another function. So we can put our response here. And this basically says that when this finishes, then we will do something else. But the difference between this and await is that await will stop your function from executing everything else. Whereas this, it will call the get and then it'll define something that's going to happen when it finishes, but everything else below will just keep going as normal. So if you have something down here that depends on the response, it's not going to work. You're going to have to put the thing that depends on the response inside this function callback. When the function is finished, it's going to call back to your code. Okay, awesome. Thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate seeing this many faces. I'm glad that we're doing something that people are interested in. What's up? So this is our on submit for the form over here. And then this is our on submit or on change. If you have any questions that pop up later, I've done a lot of React work in the past, so you can always send me a message. I'm very easy to find on Discord. Code for this will be up all night. Thank you all for coming and have a good weekend.